There we go. Okay. Calling this meeting to order, special meeting of the Missouri Valley Complex Committee. Call roll, Steve, please.
Leco,
Here.
Heim. Here. Martinez. Here. Clipfell. Here. Burleigh. Here. Peters.
Here.
Burleigh.
Here.
Gilsendegger.
Here.
Scott. Olson, Marie, absent. We have Commissioner Munson here. Julie had another commitment. And we have three guests from the question committee here today: Julie Cunin, Galen Dewing, and Dan Reese.
All right.
Good form.
Excellent. The agenda material was sent out prior to. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda? Okay, hearing none, we'll move forward, kind of a point of, so everybody's working from the same platform. There were some things that came up and developed since our last meeting, which with our kind of deadline, so to speak, of going before the county commission on April 7th, in discussion with our county commissioner liaison, it was determined that it would be in our best interest to have a special meeting. So I don't call these lately. I know everybody is busy, but we do have some pieces of business to definitely take care of today. With that, let's go right on to agenda item number 4. We'll be hearing from representatives from Swenson and Hagen on the, where are we at with the zoning, the plat, and all the things that go with it.
Jason, give those documents.
So we did go to planning and zoning for the commission, and we will continue to keep moving through the process for the zoning. P&Z and then city commission, of course, will have consent that'll come up, and then after that we'll have public hearing for that. So the zoning is continuing to move in its course, and we're to a point where we've been talking about layout in this area, and had a pre-plat meeting with the city where we went back and forth with a couple scenarios, whether it be public dedicated right of way or a privately dedicated easement. And city has given us, of course, their comments in regards to accepting the right of way. They would, allow us to petition for street improvements. They would allow us to petition for storm sewer improvements. So storm sewer in the street. They would like to see an urban section, of course. And they would be able to accept the right of way then and maintain it. And so that's very important because you're getting city services, and so it keeps things consistent with that. They don't have to worry about having parcels that could be private and parcels that could be publicly dedicated as far as what gets served and what doesn't. So our recommendation, of course, is that the public right of way does have benefits to it, and it does have things that keep you kind of in a position where you guys can manage your facility and rely on the city to manage and maintain the publicly dedicated right of ways. And so that would be something that would need to be solidified with the process through the platting. We can submit the plat this coming submittal, which would be the 4th week of April. So a plat submittal would be Friday the 25th. And that would set the sequence then for submittal, review, planning and zoning and city commission. Now, the process that we've had so far that has been defining kind of this scenario is that if we are going to have these roads that are placed where you guys would like to have them placed in a position to somewhat utilize the site to its fuller benefit, then the layout that we have in front of you allows some of the space to be used from the comments that we've heard in past meetings, okay? But that also means then that if you drive down there and look at that property down there, we can see that there are areas that would have wetlands around them. So this is kind of a, we do something now to take care of tomorrow, a future thing. And so we would be requesting to go to request for proposals with the county in regards to delineate the wetlands in this area. And so there's a situation like if, let's say the equestrian center came in and said, you know, I just want to put my stuff up on top in that northeast corner, okay? And let's say the roads that you guys have out here, you guys are like, that's fine. We're good with that. That building and that site could probably be developed without an impact, right? But if we come in here and say, well, these roads really don't fit what we're trying to get out of the property, they don't fulfill the benefit and the enjoyment and the use of the property. And we understand that the city, from a plat comment from our pre-plat meeting with them, had indicated that yes, you do have to take care of stormwater and build your ponds and all of that. Were one of the questions we had asked when we just met with them was, if we're on the bottom end of this watershed, Hay Creek, do you want that water to go and get out of here? Or are you looking for that water to be detained and decreased? Which of course slows that water down, right? So it's a timing issue. And of course they came back with their comment was, well, I think we'd like to see you have some stormwater concepts that, you know, take care of stormwater and put it in and detain it and decrease it. So that's a thing where now we got to place that stormwater somewhere. So we don't have a benefit to place it on the high side of the property. And so we naturally say, well, everything kind of runs down to that south or southwest corner. And if we've got a road shown here and that water is collected in that road and conveyed ultimately downhill, it's going to end up in the southwest corner. So if you drive out there today, you can kind of look and we see like somewhere in that area, generally there's some wetlands. So if that's the case, then we need a place for that. So either that place takes up a designation of something we've shown on the map, or we delineate the wetlands. We come up with a plan to either mitigate the affected areas, or if available, there's an option to buy into the Ducks Unlimited program. And that program actually is something where you can say, I have 2 acres of impact. I wish not to mitigate it. Do you have room in your bank for me to purchase credits? They would get back, say, sure, we do, or no, we don't. So then you can enter into an agreement with them, pay them the credits and not have to mitigate them. So again, if we weren't doing anything with the roads, as this conversation has meandered its course, moving towards having the city looking at right away, having them maintain and construct those improvements, that has now got to a point where, okay, we're at a point where if we are going to submit the plat, which we can submit it initially, and we can start running a preliminary plat through the sequence with the city. We can get through plat review, we could get through the preliminary meeting for the preliminary plat on P and Z. But we need to have a wetland delineation to define not only the area in that southwest corner, but to really clear, say, the property north of the flow line of Hay Creek. And so the obvious question is why? Why do I have to do the entire site? If this up here on top is being hayed and grassed and all that, I know it doesn't have anything on it. Well, if we potentially have an impact that we're asking to mitigate or to buy a credit from, then what's important is actually clearing the entire area that we're having as an area of interest. Because then if the Corps is looking at those documents, they would look and say, okay, I know for sure, for certain, there's no impact here. Where this is another piece of plat. And so the plat would have a preliminary plat and a final plat. And so we can start this preliminary plat here. And then once we get the delineation, we can augment that data into the plat to define. We don't get to do these delineations until May-ish, because of course, temperature, everything's dormant right now. And so it's kind of something that they would commonly call, kind of gotta get into the growing season. And so what I would recommend that the request would actually be for a delineation with a second point to help put together for credits. And a third point to in the event there is a mitigation from that impact, that they would have a disturbance. And if you were to mitigate that disturbance, or something, right? And so that's kind of a process that happens. So let's talk about then what actually does that mean? So zoning is going along. You got platting. We'd like to implement these wetlands into that plat. A discussion and a decision on what should be done, if and what the impact is, and how to proceed there. And then a permit possibly sent to the Corps if there's a disturbance. And so regardless of whether there's a disturbance and mitigation or a disturbance and credits, there would still be a permit. And they just take a little different time level, but if the goal is, which I've heard, that next year that you have your zoning, your plating, and ultimately asking the county to approve a plan development to move forward to construct the roads within the right of ways that you ultimately approve through the plating process. So that means you would want to be looking at plan development in the winter so that you could get them ready for bid in the spring. Okay. So to back that up, then that means you have this point now through that time to get the sequencing of the plat and get a plan on how to take care of any potential impacts that there may be for the defined wetlands. Okay, yes,
So do we know exactly where the line is for the defined wetlands, right? Do we have maps? Don't we have maps that have been done prior that would show that?
I have not been able to find anything where anybody has done a delineation. The second point is, even if there were, those wetlands, can grow, right? Things continually get wet here and there, and so you can see where those wetlands can continue to migrate, continue to get wet, development affects them, so an older wetland delineation would probably not be valid. Typically, the Corps would only validate those for a few years before they want them updated. But there's certain, if you go on to, there's government site that is a wetland mapper. And the caveat with that is that that wetland mapper only gives you an idea of certain signatures, certain soils that may indicate hydric application, which is one of the indicators of wetlands, right? So it would show you something on a map, but it doesn't show you exactly what and where they are.
So the county wouldn't have had to have that done when they put the jail in?
They probably only did specifically to their area,
South of the.
south of Hay Creek.
So I've got a clarifying question as far as the moving parts here.
Yeah.
So city is requiring retention at some level that we don't necessarily know yet. Right?
It's based on development, and so, when we prepare a plat and submit it to the city, we would make assumptions on, and that's like a lot of this that we've done so far is saying, what would you guys like and where and how, and then we get to say, okay, well, I know from past experience that RV park could have an impervious level of about this, right? That parking lot that has 500 parking stalls, we has area around it, so we can figure out kind of impervious levels for the property. And then we can say, based on these assumptions, here's the amount of flow that comes out. That gets used to design the storm sewer in the street, and also the detention and the decrease in runoff from existing level to proposed assumed level. The city calls that a basis of design report. And so on all subdivisions or any site plans that we do, we would typically run through that process.
So then when you create this retention or detention, whatever you want to call it, do those, does that continue to be wetlands, or is that what has to be offset?
So that's a very good question. So a wetland does not have and I'll say this poorly, a dual use, right? So, the core says, you know, basically what happens is the core is gonna come in and you do one of two things. You ask for a JD or you acquiesce to them. Okay, if you ask for a JD, you're asking for a jurisdictional determination. And then they will go look at the site and determine whether they're jurisdictional wetlands or not. And if they are, then they get to call them waters of the United States. So I can tell you from experience, Hay Creek is JD. It is jurisdictionally
Mhm.
determined to be their waters. So the wetlands get attached to all of that. And so you don't get to do stormwater management inside a wetland because it changes the composite of the wetland. And so therefore, if we take that area and say pond and there's some wetlands in there, we have to offset them in some manner, mitigation or credits. Or just move it completely out of the way. And then that means we're talking about taking away from something else. But it's more efficient to put them down at the bottom,
Mhm.
right? Because we can collect them all. It's more efficient use of land to put everything into one pot. If I'm making 10 bathtubs, I'm back sloping and doing a bunch of things and stuff like that. So, that's one of those where that, you know, definition of where those lines are would allow us to say, okay, you know, maybe that area only has half of it or something. And that's the next piece that, like, okay, if we're putting that road there, then, and we're using that as a pond, and now we need to know what that means.
So we need the delineation, and then after that would be to determine the cost of compliance, both with the city expectations as well as the core. And having these credits be a part of that.
Right.
So is it a one, the first and then second, or is it a parallel discussion as far as what the cost to comply is, or?
It's really a parallel conversation. You come up with this concept and say, we can use that embankment as our embankment for a pond. We can put a culvert underneath that and a control structure on it. If it is determined that it's too costly to mitigate those out or to buy credits, then the next step is, okay, where's the next best place to put this and how do we, and what does it, how do we, and what does it cost to get there, right? And somewhere in there, there's pluses and minuses, and it's really what I have heard from the group. And that's the part where now it's like, okay, you got your best case scenario, what's the second best case scenario? Because if we have to back it off and, you know, this space gets a little smaller and this space gets a little smaller and things like that, then we're just, you know, moving levers around.
So is your pond, your collection pond, do you use evaporation to get rid of water, or how does that?
So the best scenario I can give most people is if you took a bathtub, right? And so let's say I've got 4 or 5 gallon buckets and that's a rainstorm and I fill that bathtub up and the drain's open, that's a detention pond. So this thing is gonna purge, it's gonna come up, fill up in elevation, and then that pipe's gonna constrict that flow below a pre-development level. And then that may take 13 hours to drain out, but when it's done, it'll be dry.
Okay. So has there been any sort of ballpark estimation on the total cost to do this phase of it before any of the other development even happens?
For construction activities,
And construction activities and just the general compliance
Mhm.
on the.
so the nice thing about, one of the pros about this layout is that, you know, we could come over to, to a point where we're putting real hard numbers to things. With this delineation, then we could definitely put numbers to impacts.
Right.
And then we could say, okay, from doing this in the past recently, I know that to buy a credit costs this much per acre. And I can value or assign a value to that then.
So no hard numbers, any spitball numbers? I mean, just,
I could get you some, I just don't have any
Okay.
right now.
okay. Cause I just bring that up because, you know, if we're using this $5 million pie.
Yeah.
I mean, I can easily imagine this is well over $1 million. Right?
Depending on what you do, it can get up there pretty darn quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, so like if you're coming in to build, parking, I've always used, you know, like parking spaces, you know, if I kind of limit my curb and gutter and do some unique things, you know, saying $2,000 to $3,000 per stall, right? If you wanted to put a 100 stall parking lot in, you know, you can start calculating some very rough numbers there. You know, for roads, the road can be assessed in the storm sewer, not the outfall for the pond, but the storm sewer in the street can be assessed. And so you defer those costs. It would just be, if we are looking at bringing water and sewer, then that would be typically a developer cost. And that would be something then that we would surely go back to the city and say, city, if this is a public entity, would you look at any of those two items to be accessible or not? But from a private citizen's standpoint, developing land, the policy is that that is a developer borne cost.
I was wondering, down here in this corner, east of the detention center and southeastern part of the property out there, can more of that be used for mitigation? Yeah, even though it is a slough or a wetland
Yeah,
without,
so you can't use a wetland for credits. The easy thing typically is if you take the real light beige color on the map, that most definitely would be something that I could say you've got a very high probability of all of that being right now a wetland. Without having a definition. The hard part is you go out here and so there's areas that, you know, there's some dirt stockpiles, it's been mowed down to the nubs, you know, stuff like that. There's some real iffy areas that like, I'm not so sure all of that stuff down there is wetland, but then there's also some areas that kind of have that real chalky colored soil, you know, and how much of that is definable from their standards as a wetland.
So if you come in and you do it, you know, if they establish that, say, south of the motocross track. In so far, they don't classify that as a wetland and you build on it, can they ever come back and classify it as a wetland? In the future or not, since they grow and shrink and change and
So, if there was a delineation and the area was not defined to be a wetland, and you did something in there within the time constraints, you could do that. Now, I'll caveat that by saying as long as it's not in the floodway. There is floodway down here too. So you've got a 500 year, 100 year and a floodway. So there's a process that you can fill and remove from floodplain to develop. You have a very hard time doing stuff in the floodway. It takes H&H studies and lots of good stuff for you to happen, which typically doesn't happen. But if you developed that in those parameters, and it was high and it didn't grow wetlands again, right? And it was elevated up and above, you probably would not see it being determined to be wetlands later. But if it was low and it was wet and it could grow. And we've seen that. We've seen areas in our town, in our county, that have development. And on the downstream side of the development, where somebody hayed a field or had crops. And all of a sudden, in a 10-year span, there's an area in there that's got, you know, pockets of water and marg and, you know, reeds and cattails and that's what I mean. They typically show up on the downstream end of a development.
Excuse me. The equine site, that area, the 40 acres, are you saying that we could see a couple places where there'd be retention ponds required up there?
And that's where, you know, if there's development up here, as a condition, it could be, well, we would like you to put detention in as part of your development. They would
Okay,
bring their water down, have a pond there. Some of the things that come up then are, well, okay, if that's the case, you know, I need some drainage mechanism, so do I have to get a piece of pipe to get that drainable? What's the avenue in which we discharge it out to? Right?
well, I was wondering, because down in the jail area, I don't see any retention ponds, so I don't know if they, you know, how did, was it magic? I mean, did they buy, I'm just
Yeah.
looking, they're saying we could possibly have to have retention ponds up high.
Detention.
Okay,
Yep.
excuse me, detention.
Yep.
And down low, it's okay, you know,
They would have had to have ran a site plan and a stormwater through the city of Bismarck as well. And they would have had to have shown what their concepts were and how they manage it. And is there some depressions out here that they're managing water in a certain way? I would have to pull up their site plan and their stormwater plan to tell you that. I don't know that offhand.
I don't know enough, obviously, I look at the south of the track,
Mhm.
the motocross track, right, there's a good detention pond.
Yeah, yeah.
But, yeah, obviously, I don't know anything about it.
Are you allowed so much runoff, like say in the equestrian area, that 40 acres up there? Obviously, that's not gonna be all concrete.
Correct.
So are you allowed a certain amount of runoff? If you have so many square feet of grass area
Sure. Good question.
type of deal?
Yeah. Volume is a hard thing a rate of volume is a hard thing to quantify, right? Like imagine a garden hose just cracked open and it's draining right into your grass. Now, imagine somebody developed up there and that's equivalent to 5 garden hoses. So you have to take those 5 garden hoses, the rate of flow coming out of all 5 and get it down to the 1.
Right.
That's, so you do have a flow rate.
Okay.
It's just, we typically see that it gets to be very high once it's developed compared to existing.
But there should be codes and different things that you have to follow with
Oh, yeah,
the city to, that give you the mathematical equations to use for that, right?
Yep, and there's hydraulic models that we run and the standards we use for determining how the coefficients come together to run them. We look at the soil survey. So Burleigh County has a soil survey map. We look at those soils and those soils are defined by A, B, C, and D soils.
Mhm.
And those soils have a different rate of runoff attached to them.
Right.
So then we can take that and say, okay, the equestrian center had B and C soils and it was 50-50. We can define what the rate of runoff was. And then we go and look and say, okay, either they have a plan or we assume a number of impervious. And then we take that and we run that. And so some of the things you'll see is like, okay, this was a grassland up here in good condition, so its runoff rate was a 74. And I'm gonna put, an area where I'm gonna have maybe some irrigation around the building, and everything else will be some form of non-irrigated grass. And I can take that with the concrete, building, all that, and I can run that into a model, and I can tell you what the increase in runoff is. So many CFS on a 2-year, 5-year, 10-year, 25, 50, and 100-year event. They can then come in and they could design that pond. And so that's that basis of design that I was talking about. We put that together and say, well, I know they had a layout. I'll assume to use their layout. And that's a starting point. And then from there, if whatever changes they have to imperviousness, gravels, concrete, then they have to offset and they have to manage. But then if they're gonna put a pond up here, we gotta make sure that we have some form of infrastructure for them to drain it.
Right,
But it's all laid out there.
and your runoff to run to that.
Yep. The city of Bismarck has a stormwater design manual that we use, that all the engineering firms would use as a basis of pulling the numbers to calculate your design. And then they have standards for streets, so when we go in there and define how much water gets to a street at intersections, we're looking at those, and that's what starts to define when storm sewer and how far storm sewer has to come up to. And then we also look at them on the various events, so we're not flooding right of ways.
Okay, so. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to synthesize all of this. Delineation of the wetlands is not being required by the city at this point, correct?
That is correct. They will ask about it when we
Right.
submit the plat.
So, and we can do the preliminary plat
We would start it.
without it. But no matter what you're saying, we're going to have a delineation in order to get that final plat approved, more or less,
Yes, and
Okay.
it's twofold. It's not only the plat,
right?
but it's your future
Use,
development,
right.
right? So the
Because
city's
of the
gonna,
right of way that the city's
Mhm.
going to take over, okay?
yeah, the city's gonna say, if you want us to do this, then show us what your impacts are.
Right, which I can totally understand from a
Yep.
city standpoint. So you're here today, not only to totally blow my mind on engineering. But also, as I wrote down, the request for the delineation to help put together an option for one of two options, depending on what the result of the delineation is, either to mitigate or ask for, or to pay for credits.
Yep.
If there's a mitigation plan, a request to do a 5-year oversight,
First of all, to delineate,
first of all, yeah, so the number one is the request for delineate,
Yep.
That then would help drive one of two options, the mitigation or the credits,
or avoidance.
which would probably not. gonna
Yeah.
happen, But anyway, mitigation, credits, avoidance, if there is a mitigation, then it would you're asking for a 5-year oversight
The second
plan.
The second point would be to have that firm help to compile and submit either the mitigation plan,
Right,
that permit to the Corps, or the credit
right,
route.
right. But if we do go the mitigation route, there is that 5-year overplan, if a disturbance, so on and so forth, but the disturbance occurs regardless if it's a mitigation or a credit. Both of those situations cause a disturbance, correct?
Yes, if there's a disturbance, you have two routes, mitigation or credits.
So the one question I did have on the credits. Cap and trade, one question I had on the credits, if we get at the credit and we buy it. Does that render the land basically useless? Is it just sitting there? We're not actually having to do anything with it? You can't build on it still? Cause
So-
what I try to like is when we did a development, a housing subdivision, we had the option to either put in a park or pay
Sure.
off
Yep.
not putting in the park.
Yep.
Is the credits paying off not putting in the park?
So, the mitigation part is to say, we're gonna, destroy these wetlands here, but we'll place them over here. We'll rebuild them.
Gotcha.
Okay. The accreditation part is saying, we're gonna destroy these wetlands. I don't wanna mitigate them anywhere on my site. Ducks have a program,
Some farmer Joe on the
Yep.
western part, whatever, gave up extra land,
Yep.
so on and so forth. Yeah,
so they
gotcha.
bank them.
Is there enough bank?
Yeah, they bank them up to a point where then they're like, okay, we got enough bank. We're gonna go do this project now. And so
Okay.
they might be looking for like 100 acres or something. And
So credits, we eventually could develop that land if the credit is,
if you decide to do it by mitigation or credits, once that permit got approved, you can take those out and do what you wish.
and then that is not even beginning to talk about the floodplain stuff. That's it. We're not gonna touch that conversation.
My recommendation all day long will be stay away from the
Yeah.
flood.
Been there. Okay, so at our last Missouri Valley Complex Committee meeting, we did have a motion and approved on the floor to go to the county commission to ask for the approval to do an RFP on such a delineation. So that we already have planned. What I'm understanding is that you're encouraging us to expand that ask of the county to do this delineation, a request for delineation to help then put together based off of that. You're basically wanting to go one step further than let's do an RFP to delineate. You want an RFP to delineate and have enough
To get you through the
to get
next
through the,
step.
plan. Gotcha.
Yeah. And there is merit to that because unless you're not going to do anything with your roads, your infrastructure, things like that, then, through our process, we have kind of got to a point where it's like, okay, you would like to fully enjoy the property and you guys look at the road network and the infrastructure network, and through the conversations we've had, have indicated that, these are not sufficient, we feel, for our future use. And so the expansion of that infrastructure now is getting you more to a point where this is going to serve you well, because you can finally get things where you would like them to utilize it, and then also to go through that process to get you from having to deal with that again.
Right, so it's just, it's a slightly larger ask than what we were looking at before, but it
Yeah.
can punch out some middle BS that we don't want to have to do incrementally.
Do you have the write-up of what you're asking for a technical basis for the motion?
We can provide some information for that.
It, I think that for the city or the county commission's purposes, they need to understand that this needs to be done regardless of what does or does not happen on the property. But then going forward, it's very obvious that we're gonna need a very strict cost management plan here, because this could get out of control really quickly, and the environmental compliance could eat up your entire budget and you have nothing left to do anything else.
Well, I might add, the 2 points Jason's making. One is the delineation and then mitigating if there are impacts. And it's credit or avoidance, so shuffling things on site too can save you a lot of money.
Yeah.
So,
But we need to get to that point. So my Robert's Rules of Order knowledge stops at motion second. Do we need to amend a previous motion, or do we need a new motion? And I'm looking at Steve and Dustin, you go
I
first.
think replacement motion,
Either replacement or an addendum, I would
that's
say,
messy, so
yeah,
replacement would be
Replacement.
simpler.
and then it's a matter of language,
Then it goes forwarded to Monday night street.
yeah.
Right,
So before you entertain any type of emotion, maybe there's relevance to the motion to be made, in that not only that the request for proposals would include a delineation of the corresponding wetlands north of a creek, but then also have an approval to convey a plan for implementation with the Corps and for project oversight of the potential constructed wetlands. That then could qualify you to have just the bullet points of the three pieces.
That was because I can wants to tackle that one.
Madam Chair, I think the important part there is we also want Jason or Landon to write the language up
Right.
for the Burleigh County Commission packet that would be due to Auditor Sponskowski by noon Thursday. I've just sent him a note to add it to the agenda items so that it's on the agenda, but Thursday would be the deadline for the language to be included in the packet.
So, correct me if I'm wrong. Since we already have a motion and an approval to request from the county commission to draft this RFP for the delineation anyway. That's large in scope because it's limited and vice versa. Does this committee need to include a more specific motion for these other pieces, or can that just be, that RFP is going to be developed in conjunction
Right.
with Swenson Hagen anyway?
The only question I would have is, if I remember the motion correctly from the last meeting, was there was a dollar amount attached to it.
I don't think so.
If there wasn't, then I think we're good.
No, because
If
when
there was, then we don't know a dollar amount, so.
Right.
For whatever reason, I thought Marie's motion included a dollar amount, so.
and I don't have my stuff on me right now, but as I wrote it down last time, it was they recommend to petition for bid
Okay,
for the delineation for the Missouri Valley Complex Committee using, and I do believe that there was a caveat in there, using
Missouri Valley Complex Fund.
blah, 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 but we had a discussion about ballpark figures, but
Okay.
I don't believe that that was included in the
Right,
motion.
no.
Then I would think your motion that you had is already good.
I think so.
Yep,
And if not, it can be taken care of at the county commission by having that
Yep.
motion there
right,
approved and voted on.
Yep.
So if I'm correct in my assumption here, we're good from that standpoint. However, very important information for the committee to have
Yes.
as to those pieces, but
Yep.
the
Correct.
onus is going to be on the
Yep.
commission.
Correct, yep, it's a recommendation from the committee to move this forward.
Yeah, that's basically all we're asking
Yep.
for.
Yep,
The commission needs to know that. We are supportive of the scope that Swenson and Hagen is,
I like that.
yes,
suggesting. And so basically the motion is to defer to their recommendation to the county commission so that they can properly write up the RFP.
Any, I think it's clear as a wetland mud.
Quicksand, actually.
Yeah, right. Is there any further discussion on this agenda item?
I appreciate the update.
Yeah, that was excellent. So we've got the update on the zoning approval. We've discussed the wetland delineation under number 4B. Did you have any additional, so on C, recommendation to the county commission for public development of complex roads and infrastructure, that I have in my notes was approved, or do we need to have more discussion on that?
Well, in December meeting, the committee approved moving with the plat development that infrastructure and roadways be publicly developed. And it's just affirming then that Swenson Hagen Monday night would bring that forward to the county commission along with the first glance at the plat, so that because that's important for discussion with the city of how these roads and infrastructure is going to be developed. Not privately by the individual organizations, but publicly through the county.
Okay. Any further discussion on that? Thank you so
Thank you.
much. All right. Moving on to agenda item number 5, consideration of the equestrian and ag committee's request to the Burleigh County Commission to proceed with project plan development and location of the proposed equestrian and ag center as a Burleigh County project. Am I looking at Julie for this information? Or is there any presentation for this? What is it that the Ag and Equestrian Committee is asking? So what we're looking at is chain of command here, chain of communication. What we would need, the Missouri Valley Complex Committee would need is a request for this committee then to move forward to the county.
Presentation to the county.
Yeah,
Right.
recommend,
Right.
recommend that we
That's supposed to
continue
be bid process, so.
our process, continue our planning. As it fits within the Missouri Valley Complex Committee's wishes.
Okay. So I'm hearing it, the Ag and Equestrian Committee is requesting from this committee to move forward, basically saying, yes, continue your planning process. This committee needs to make that approval to then take it to the county commission. So we would need a motion for that.
And we need the location, right? In that.
As identified in this preliminary
As
plan.
As identified in,
The further planning can be developed.
Okay.
So if we're talking about watershed, boy, we're talking about a lot of things that have to be dependent on that location.
Great. Absolutely.
Here's another question for Jason. What about the other kind of runoff that they're gonna be dealing with? Is that gonna be a separate piece
What
of the equation?
What are the running?
Well, the horses.
Thank you.
You're gonna require fences?
A long time ago, I was involved in a project going farmstead to farmstead, taking pictures of runoff, so I do have that much background in that.
So in terms of nutrient management, what you're talking That's gotta be contained.
Is that what the term is?
That's gotta be contained.
Okay,
There is a state dealing with that specifically.
okay,
And
So
if
there
you
won't be any
mentioned
runoff.
we are the hotel, not the apartment. And so, and we will be indoor stalling.
okay.
And there'll be, livestock that's for the event, that kind of thing, but typically that's often hauled in and hauled out.
yeah, we'll have to have containment area for the waste. For sure.
With air fresheners around it.
Yeah.
It doesn't affect the neighbors and.
Maybe buy some of those data center fans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll need a motion.
So you need.
Yeah, we would need to entertain a motion to approve this request from the Equestrian Ag Committee to take this forward to the county.
I so move.
Okay,
I'll second that.
all right, so there is a motion and a second on the table for the Missouri Valley Complex Committee to
To recommend the move.
yeah, consider of the, I believe that is written pretty good here, so.
So that-
Yeah, so the Missouri Valley Complex Committee is first and seconds, the consideration of the Equestrian Ag Committee's request to move this request to the Burleigh County Commission to proceed with the project plan development and location of the proposed Equestrian and Ag Center as a Burleigh County project. Is that a fair?
We need to have the location
I-
part of that motion as per the preliminary
For the
plat.
preliminary plat. So that's 40 acres.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm going to read that again.
sorry.
There's a first and a second, for the Missouri Valley Complex Committee consideration of the Equestrian and Ag Committee's request to the Burleigh County to take that request to the Burleigh County Commission to proceed with the project plan development and location of the proposed center as indicated in the preliminary plat as a Burleigh County project. We have a first and a second.
Yeah, first one, that's been seconded.
Any discussion on the motion?
I guess I'm just curious why we're pushing. I thought you guys were still like in, like, you were the main person in that area and stuff. I'm just curious why we have to reaffirm it, so to speak, with the county. Is there
No.
stuff that came off?
Well,
So we
no,
look
but
at-
you may have.
And what we want to do is make sure, because we're really the first big project coming through the Missouri Valley Complex Committee, that we establish precedents and chain of command. So our coming to present here is out of respect for the committee and the meetings where we want everybody that's looking at a project to do the same.
Very similar to Josh coming at the last meeting, telling us he was building a racetrack out here without asking. So I looked at this committee and went, we're gonna follow the rules.
Any other discussion on the motion? I don't have to read that again before we take the roll, do we?
No.
No,
Cool. Steve, call the roll.
Nicole,
Yes.
Heim,
Yes.
Martinez,
Yes.
Bookfeld.
Yep.
Grillo,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes,
Graylick,
Yes.
Hills and Digger.
Yep.
That's all. Motion carried.
Motion carries. Okay. Third or next item, that's number 6, discussion of Burleigh County proposed Missouri Valley Complex 2025 ag land and hay leases. Do you want me to say what I know about it and then you can, all I know is it was brought before, it's been requested to come before the committee to not put those out for bid, correct?
well, number one, I wanted you guys to know that annually, we advertise for these 2 leases. One, the ag land that is currently designated for the Ag and Equestrian Center. Number 2 is the hay land. And so that's an annual contract that goes out. It will be on the agenda for Monday night, the 7th. I don't see an issue with the hay land, obviously, because that's not gonna affect anybody. But I think we need to, if this committee has a strong opinion to voice to the commission, whether we should or should not put it out this year for the ag land, I think this committee needs to make that a request to the commission. If the Ag and Equestrian Center is still a year out from breaking ground, will it be a concern? And so that's what I think you guys need to decide. If it's a, if you want to recommend to the county commission one way or the other.
What are the dates of those annual contracts? Like, when do they start and stop?
I think last year's were May to May, but we're behind the ballpark
Yeah.
right now for the, not for the haying side of it, but for the ag land and I should have had them at a meeting a month ago, but it wasn't there, so.
Definitely the hay line.
Yes.
Cause somebody's gonna have to keep that
Yep.
down.
Somebody's gotta keep it down.
Where's the hay line at?
Where our sign is,
Where-
Low Valley,
Front, on front. 10. Highway
that,
10.
yeah, and then
Road
there's,
ditches.
it runs down, and then there's some, they actually do hay some of the,
Like
Area.
through here.
no, it's this area here, and then there is some area
That's my motion.
So there's a motion on the table, and I want to make sure that I'm clarifying this, that you're talking specifically about
The
the
cropland.
cropland,
Yes.
Yes.
not
40
the
acres.
hayland. So there's a motion on the table to put that cropland into a cover crop of sorts.
Yes.
And no lease,
No, no what?
and no lease.
No lease on it. No.
Without a lease.
Unless it gets really tall and stuff and we rent it out for hay this fall or something. Have to see how it grows.
That's something the committee could take up at a later date, but we do have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second to take the cropland. The cropland to be put into grassland or cover crop without a lease. We have a first and a second. Is there any discussion?
Who pays for it?
That I
Who
was
pays
just
for
gonna
it and
ask.
who's gonna maintain it?
Yeah,
So just having something there, I agree with you on that side of things, Wayne. We can't just let it sit dormant. I know the
Right,
discussion of a
yeah.
dust storm's an issue.
Yeah.
It sounds like we're all in agreement on for sure renting out the hayland. You know, as
Yep.
normal. My recommendation, and I guess I don't know if I need to amend it, but
You
would
can.
be to have that 40+ acres, whatever we seed into a cover crop of any kind, I don't know, grass or some kind of
Mhm.
mixture would make sense in my mind. And to have that option be to whoever's renting out the hayland. Does that make sense?
So is the. If the Ag and Equestrian Center. Starts. Doing some preliminary. Stuff for building
Mhm.
for next year. We're okay with being up there and going through and doing that, or are we off limits
In 26.
in 25?
25.
I don't see it happening until probably fall, towards fall, so. It'll be done rolling by then, and hopefully it'll be cold.
That option should still be there, though, shouldn't
Yeah,
it, just in
should be.
case?
I mean, I would. Being one of the stakeholders there, being a part of that group, I would want that because. If we get our things moving along like we're wanting to and potentially can. I want to be able to do that. We want to start sooner than later. I don't want to be handcuffed to waiting till fall and being pushed off another year, that whole process.
Cause if you.
That's why. I agree, something maybe. Needs to be done because of.
No.
The dust potential of blowing and. Create a. Probably more of a problem for the county than anything if people are complaining, but go ahead.
So. This would apply anywhere out here. You're working towards the last conversation we had with the plat and everything. So, coming into the city's jurisdiction, which you are, in order to get a building permit, you'll get a city building permit, City of Bismarck, which means you'll, right now, the property is platted, but you're working through a plat, right? So there'd have to be some definition of how that would work out with the city, which maybe could be done. But would the city require us as the committee to have petitions? And if it's determined to have water and sewer constructed privately by the committee, then that being bid and under contracts, so the city would be allowed to issue a building permit. So I just bring up a point that I heard 25. I think like we maybe should, I can talk to the city and say, okay, if the Equestrian Center came out and hypothetically wanted to start construction, would you guys be able to get to a point to issue a building permit? Or are you going back and following some of the policy procedural items that you pick up everybody else on? So, because right now you're platted, but you're talking.
You're saying we won't get this done in 25, potentially.
Well, you're gonna be asking to
you have
have.
3 months of building.
So you need a site plan,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, so let's just say today you had a site plan ready to be submitted to the city. So that gets submitted to the city, that'd take a month to get that reviewed. At that point, you can get a site plan approval and that can be done with caveats, conditions. But then the building permit, they might say, or they might say on the site plan side even, you know, you're asking for city services, but there's no city services here. So like now this timing thing comes into play and maybe they don't want to issue it until there's petitions and there's plans approved at the city. Like if I do a subdivision in town and, you know, say Wayne's the developer and he says, I got, you know, big boy coming in. I'd be like, okay, well, you know, we need to get the plat done, the annexation, the zoning, we gotta get, you know, water and sewer plans done, we gotta get escrow account put together, get that under contract and get the city ready to sign it. If all those things happen, then yes, big boys come into your land. And we'll be in the middle of construction during that process, but then fire comes up to play. So let's say you're in construction, these roads don't get built until 26. Well, how does fire and emergency get to the site? Because gotta have a fire apparatus road that can get you there, right? Does that mean part of that, you have to build a fire apparatus road to your site for that construction worker that had an accident or something?
Now, water and sewer is available right on along Highway 10. So, I mean, when I look at developing this, I would, cost wise, would be cheaper if we could get access to the water and sewer right along Highway 10.
Sure. If water can be supplied.
If water can be
you know, the
supplied.
Appropriate water and all.
But that's an application process. That's a conversation process.
Right. Are you technically our project manager yet, or have we? Because in my mind, we're already to the point where we need the Gantt charts and all that stuff.
So we still have a motion, an active motion on the
Yes.
table, so there's
I
a
didn't
motion
mean
and
to
a second.
interject. I just,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Motion and a second to not put the ag land out for lease. Instead, that would go with whoever has the hay lease when would seed it in a cover crop for the 2025 year. I believe that's the motion.
Well, no, it's
No?
just putting it into grass is the initial.
Okay,
motion. I was just
That's
saying
right,
for the
yes,
sake of a
sorry.
potential amendment to try and have a little bit more, I guess, weight, so it's not just sitting there. And the thing is, look at all these timelines. I mean, Alan, I want that positive development to move forward. It's just with what we've been dealt with, it seems like it's more and more log jams kind of stopping. So instead of having to just sit there, at least get utilized, but.
And the city is dragging their feet on all construction.
Oh, Jesus Christ. I had a building plan put in before Thanksgiving. I still don't have a permit to remodel my building.
They are dragging their feet on everything,
Yeah,
Even-
don't apply for any special treatment.
even city buildings. They are dragging their feet.
So
The motion is not putting the cropland out for lease and instead having it seeded into a cover crop.
Correct.
If there's any changes to that, that is first and seconded.
It's
We
getting,
would-
it is.
I got one more thing, so.
Okay.
If that's all right.
Yeah, we're still in the discussion period until somebody calls a question.
So is this gonna get pushed back on by the commissioners because they're gonna ask who's paying for it? They're not gonna pay for it, so.
They're gonna wanna know who's gonna pay for the cover crop.
And then. The next part of your guys' discussion will be, then why not just lease it?
But here's the thing, we're so late in the game at this point. If we put it out for bids for 21 days, we're gonna vote on it first meeting of May. Who's gonna want to put a crop on it? And this is honestly, this falls on my responsibility. I should have had it on the agenda a month ago. And it honestly slipped my mind, and Auditor Sponskowski saved my butt.
Well, if we are in a drought year and guys are looking for hayland, I mean, I don't know what your guys is, if you're gonna do it strictly as a cropland price or if it's gonna be hayland, they're putting a regular cover. I mean, I don't know where you're at, but trying to make sure you get enough hay for everything is gonna be a priority, so.
Yeah.
I don't doubt we'd have
I'm okay
somebody.
with that. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to.
Yeah.
Tell the future, which.
Well, and then, yeah, I need to figure out who's gonna plant it and what that cost is.
Yep, there's comments from the peanut gallery.
From the peanut gallery, sometimes what I've done in different situations with rented cropland too is always the caveat that says if there's been a disturbance, that would be credited back to the leaser to.
Oh, sure.
So at this point, we still have a singular motion to not put this out for lease. Not put the cropland out for lease and have it planted as a cover crop. The discussion that I'm hearing on the table really comes in is the key is who's going to be putting in that cover crop. So we would either need to call the question on the original motion or that motion needs to be amended.
Honestly, I think you put that back on me as the portfolio holder to figure out who and what the cost is.
Get behind that.
Yeah.
So. I should call the roll. So let me repeat, so just so we're utterly clear, that the motion that we are voting on is to not put the cropland out for lease. That it would instead be seeded into a cover crop. Period. And it's a sidebar conversation, once things just to figure that out. Steve, would you like to call the roll?
Sure. McCall,
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
Martinez,
Yes.
Cliffbell.
Yep.
Graylow,
Yes.
Peters,
Yes.
Graylow,
Yes.
Hills there.
Yes.
All right, so the motion to not put the ag land out for lease and instead have it seeded as a cover crop has been approved. Commissioner Munson, being the portfolio holder, are you willing to accept the responsibility for figuring that piece out?
I appreciate you asking, but you didn't have to.
Is this, so that's the ag land, with the hay leases, I don't believe that we need to have a motion or action on that,
No.
since it will go forward
Yeah.
and that you as a portfolio holder again. Is this a part that I will have to carry it all to the county commission?
No, no.
Didn't believe
This was
so.
mostly for your knowledge so that you
Gotcha.
guys knew this was in play.
Okay. Any more discussion on the hay and the ag leases? Seeing none, yes, Steve, I can tell you. more.
I have one item,
Yes.
and, with there Julie, Galen, and Dan, and Alan. To let you know that where the Egg and Equestrian Egg Center is, we've had some great help from Eng Tech and also Hubel Design. And we have a preliminary site plan that will be going to the county commission on Monday night as we make this request. And it will be on the agenda packet Thursday night, so we can spend a lot more time, but just pass this around quickly. Everybody can take a quick look. And we have looked at the site design. It's the main arena, practice arena, public facilities, mezzanine, meeting rooms, indoor livestock handling, as well as the initial phase of 400 indoor stalls.
Yeah.
With the move to 600 eventually. And as Julie mentioned, to be the hotel,
They've all seen.
hotel, not the apartment building.
I like that terminology.
But also the major component up there, and this fits on that 40 acres and it leaves us some room, but. From the original planning, we've changed some traffic patterns and where trailers are going, unloading livestock and access and all those kinds of things, but. A big key to this is the outdoor rodeo facility to be relocated, but also developing a Indian pony track. Half-mile track, which will be the first one of that size in this region. And so it's a key component to the development of this. This development is being looked at in the whole complex. Will be that the cornerstone project to drive improvements on everything out there. And, the parking and proximity and proximity to other facilities and creating more parking at Buckstop Junction and parking with the motocross group and the campgrounds, this can drive the whole thing. And that's why it's critical as a county project, county owned. So, part of the request on Monday will also then to start putting together that plan of development, but funding and the committee and the whole work. So how to move forward. This will be out Monday night then to the county commission. And we've had great help from friends to help us design and lay this out, and And as you can see, the major activity of trailers and things in the north side and pedestrian and public side, south side, also gathering spaces out there also designed to supplement the activities that are going on. So, take a quick look. I'll collect those again, but it'll be out public starting Thursday, Friday.
Thanks to the Ag and Equestrian Center for being the whipping boy, I guess, of the first new project to drive all of this forward. So a lot of work has been done.
We want all of you there in case there's transfusions needed after.
Is there any other items for the good of the order? Seeing as none, and barring any objections, we will stand in adjournment until the next meeting of the Missouri Valley Complex Committee, Wednesday, April 16th, 12 noon downstairs.
Thank you for putting that in the packet.
Thanks.
In the question.